I want to. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to start by making this dua that you and your loved ones are staying safe in this tough time. Um, I know it's very tough for all of us going through this situation at the moment, but hopefully things will get better, right? Okay, so with that, let me start sharing my screen and get started on today's topic. And I want to thank Sayed Bhai and rest of the organizers for organizing this tech talk today. And I want to specifically thank you guys for taking the time out to hearing me out on some of the interesting aspects which are occurring in the industry today, especially in the multi-cloud management world where distributed computing is at the core. DevSecOps becomes a very, very vital operating model for many enterprises who are doing this today. All right, so with that, let's get started. In topic for today's tech talk is DevSecOps concepts and careers. And there was a very specific request from Sayed Bhai to touch upon careers specifically when I send the agenda. So I want to spend some time there as well towards the end of the tech talk and take you through some of the information I've put together. What we're going to cover today is listed out on this agenda slide, and there are few important aspects that we have to touch upon when we're talking about DevSecOps. So we'll touch upon the evolution of DevSecOps. We'll look at this interesting phenomena which is occurring in the industry today, which is being called as everything as a code, EAC. Without recapping DevOps, we wouldn't be able to understand DevSecOps completely from a holistic point of view. So we'll very briefly touch upon DevOps and recap what DevOps is. For those of you who are already in the DevOps space, you might be familiar. I'm not going to go too much into details, but for those of you who are new, it will be interesting to connect the dots and help you understand what DevOps is. Then we'll get into introduction of DevSecOps, and I'll try and attempt to take you into a little more deeper, detailed view of DevSecOps and stop it at a level where we are able to take some actions and outcomes from this learning today and see how it relates to your business and what your business and what your enterprises are doing about it today. And then towards the end, we'll touch upon the careers. And because there is a lot of content to cover, I appreciate if we can take the questions towards the end of the session. That helps me complete the story and give you in a very nice and easy to understand manner concepts that emerge from this field, right? So that's what is in stock for us today. And let me get started by describing some of the problems we have seen as we stitch the evolution of DevSecOps together, right? So on this slide, what I'm trying to describe, and I'll touch upon some of these aspects which are very important. But first, an important problem that industries and enterprises who are focused on enterprise hybrid IT are facing today is the problem of silos. This problem of silos is very prevalent in the traditional operating models. Those of you who have been in IT for some time now understand there is a traditional way of managing, building hybrid IT solutions, and then there is a modern way of building technology solutions. And so we'll discuss a lot of technologies and some of the concepts, but I want to focus on these three personas that you see here. There's a persona of Shahid, who is the manager for the development team. You can call him development lead. Then there is the second persona of Moini, who is an operations lead, and he has a team of um, IT administrators, IT specialists who are focused on looking at infrastructure aspects, right? So Shahid and his team is focused on development of applications and doing all kinds of coding and programming and all of that. And Moini on the other side and his team is responsible for operations management from an infrastructure point of view, right? And then there is this third persona that you see at the bottom of this chart, which is Sarah, and she's focused on information security aspects, right? And there is a team of security professionals reporting into Sarah, and they are purely focused on the mission to infuse security into whatever we do in the world of IT, right? So there are these three very interesting teams. They existed in the traditional world, they continue to exist in the modern world, and they will futuristically also exist. They have a very critical role to play as we build IT solutions and IT ecosystems for enterprises, for our own businesses, and stuff like that. And each of these three personas that I described and the teams I described, traditionally they have never been talking to each other. They rarely come across a situation where they have worked in a collaborative manner and come up with a solution. That has been a problem in the traditional world, where Shahid's developers and programmers are focused on building applications, and their intent is right. Their core focus is towards development of a business application or app, different type of programming requirements that they have, and they never have to interface with someone in Moini's team, unless and otherwise there is a requirement to go and deploy application, right? At that juncture where you are ready to deploy an application, you might need infrastructure. So Shahid will talk to Moini and say, Moini, can your team give me a particular server on top of which I want to deploy the application that my team has developed? And that's the only place where that conversation or that collaboration happens in the traditional world. And always Sarah and her team has to deal with Shahid and Moini separately in the traditional world, right? So there are very specific application security requirements that Sarah need to deal with. And when she goes to Shahid, that set is very different from what she will recommend or the requirements that are needed to harden infrastructure from a security standpoint, right? So when she goes to Moini, her team will have a totally different set of requirements. So again, there is this um, overhead of talking separately to application development personas and to infrastructure uh, operations management type of personas. And that traditionally has been creating a lot of silos, right? The design itself has promoted that silo. And over a period of time, as we come into the modern era of application development, and we look at technologies like microservices framework and some of the hot things which are happening in the market from a software development lifecycle point of view, that old traditional way of I will work separately, you work separately is not going to work out. There needs to be a much more collaborative approach, right? So before we get into the solution, let's look at some of the problems these guys are facing, right? So Shahid, if you see the question above, he's focused on starting to develop a critical business application. And he has this question, can I start? Because as part of the application development, he needs to know what is the infrastructure stack that he's going to use on top of which his application is going to survive, right? And Moini on the other side is asking this question and telling Shahid, no, we cannot start right now because he's not aware of the application requirements. He's not done the infrastructure sizing needed. He has challenges on the infrastructure side. There is no capacity. And also, if those of you who are in IT deep, right, you understand the complexity and challenges that come in the infrastructure space when you are setting up a data center or when you're setting up a cloud ecosystem for your workloads. You come across a lot of complexity, and just doing that analysis of what is needed is a very time consuming affair, right? And provisioning in the traditional data center world has been manual. You have to bring in servers, rack and stack them within the data center, get the networking, storage, compute, all of that configured. You need to build the virtualization layer and so on. So that overall setup in the infrastructure space itself is complex, and that's why Moini is always burdened with uh, this requirement challenge that needs to be coming up front rather than early rather than immediate, right? So that's another challenge. And for security, one of the things, one of the main challenges in the traditional way of building security in IT solutions has been that security has always been dealt towards the end of the life cycle of a particular process. What I mean by that is, if you're building an application, your application developers will build the application and then towards the end realize that, oh, they need to also look at the security aspect before the application is deployed in production or it needs to go out in the market. And suddenly they have to deal with now security professionals and their requirements. And the application teams also realize that security team has a whole different perspective. They want to implement controls to safeguard your application and stuff like that, which might even influence the application architecture, and some of the application architecture needs to be redone, right? And that is again adding more time before the application can go to market. So that's another challenge in the traditional world, where security has always been dealt in the end of the software development lifecycle. And also similarly on the infrastructure side, there are a whole lot of security implications that and controls that needs to be established for making your infrastructure secure. Otherwise, the world have seen enough attacks made by the hackers, right, on the infrastructure side, and how notorious they can become very soon and very easily. So security, while it plays an important role in the traditional world, it has always been dealt towards the end of the process. So to summarize, there are two key problems that we discussed just now. One is lack of visibility, lack of communication, and lack of cooperation between developers, infrastructure administrators, and information security professionals, which has been there for a long, long time in the traditional operating model, right? And then the inability of the professionals to look at cross-domain concerns that are at play. So as a developer, in the traditional world, I'm not interested to understand what an IT administrator or IT specialist is doing, and what are some of the challenges they come across when they are actually taking the application and deploying it on top of infrastructure, right? So that is another issue, or you can say inability to look at cross-domain concerns, right? So this problem, understanding this problem is important, because from there the entire evolution of DevOps and then extension into DevSecOps has happened in the world. So this technology, or you can call it solution, was the first mechanism that emerged to facilitate understanding of cross-domain concerns between developers and infrastructure operators. This is known as infrastructure as a code. And those of you who are working on technologies like Terraform or AWS Cloud Formation or any other form of infrastructure as a code solution, you would understand the importance of how what infrastructure as a code brings in to the overall life cycle of software development, right? What is infrastructure as a code? Simply, it is basically a high level descriptive coding language which is used to automate a couple of aspects of infrastructure, right? You can provision infrastructure automatically, you can deprovision infrastructure automatically, you can add different configuration automatically, all of that, if you are able to write infrastructure as a code. And I'm not going to spend too much of time in explaining what infrastructure as a code is, but those of you who want to learn more about it, go Google out. There are a lot of fantastic tutorials and information available on what infrastructure as a code is. But at a very high level, it uh, automates um, and eliminates the need for developers to manually provision and manage servers, operating systems, databases, storage, and other infrastructure elements. Every time they want to develop or test or deploy a software application, if they already have an infrastructure as a code template, all they have to do is just initiate that template, and the infrastructure gets deployed automatically in the target environment. And then on top of that, their application images will also get deployed, right? Their application stack will get deployed. So this became very transformative or disruptive in the IT operating model, and both development teams led by Shahid and operations team led by Moini both had this ability to look at infrastructure as a code and bring in their requirements into one single place, right? That template usually is either a YAML template, or there are other formats in which you can build out infrastructure as a code template, but both have to contribute there, right? Jointly. They cannot do this separately. And that's how the silos problem is broken by introducing infrastructure as a code technology. So in this slide, what you can see is Shahed brings in the application code. Moini from the operations side is able to bring in the infrastructure configuration code. And the idea is they can build the overall stack together. Both the application stack and the infrastructure stack can go hand in hand together through an infrastructure as a code template, right? And the idea is to run this together jointly now. There are no more silos. Both of them work and their teams work hand in hand, and they are able to deploy solutions across hybrid multi-cloud, right? So IBM Cloud, AWS, on-premise, private cloud, Azure, Google Cloud, whatever type of target environment they have to deploy, they are able to deploy application in infra automatically using infrastructure as a code and orchestration technologies onto the target environment. This became a very new culture in the industry. It not just became a culture, but the process that it brought in and the technology that brought in was also phenomenal. And this became a super hit in the industry, right? And this is known as DevOps. The ability to deploy application infrastructure code automatically using formats like infrastructure as a code and orchestration technologies in an automated manner is known as DevOps at a very high level. We'll do a quick recap on DevOps a little later on the other slides. But this idea was seen by likes of Sarah, and they were fascinated in the security, and they started questioning. So if infrastructure leads like Moini can bring in infra config as a code and build an infrastructure as a code template, why not we bring in security aspects also as code, right? So there is this idea which got born, which was the security as a code idea, which means security can now be written as a code and brought into the overall code base for an application goes with the infrastructure stack, including the security, right? And so this idea again gave way to collaboration between Shahid and Sarah. They were able to come together, Shahid bringing in the secure coding and artifact security details as they were getting built out as part of the application code. And Sarah was also able to bring in security baseline and infuse security monitoring aspects, like an agent can be added into the code, right, as an integrated component within the application base for security monitoring and stuff like that. And the idea was really to protect all of this together. So you can see while DevOps is able to bring development and operations together, and the idea is to run the whole thing together. Um, in the SecOps world, and this is known as SecOps, right, where security is being shifted to the left side and is jointly being worked upon by uh, among Shahid and Sarah. This was the idea was to protect everything together. So running together, protecting together, all of this um, changed the industry in which the traditional operating model was established. And here is where the emergence of this idea of everything as a code came into play in the industry, right? And it's important we understand that this is beginning of a new generation of technology altogether, right? Everything can be software defined today. Everything can be written as a code. So you will ask me question, Moini, so can you give us some real examples so that we are able to relate to what do you mean by everything as a code? So this slide kind of has some of the popular examples that I've listed out. Infrastructure as a code, people who are working on Terraform or CloudFormation, they know how to use that. It's basically a simple workflow to automate provisioning of infrastructure in minutes, right? What used to take months and months of manual effort, with infrastructure as a code, you can deploy infrastructure almost instantaneously. Within 2-3 minutes, you should have your infrastructure up and running. There are other ideas like environment as a code. Those of you who are working on container technologies and familiar with Docker, you know that it's an immutable type of infrastructure that can be deployed just within seconds using orchestration technologies like Kubernetes and in some of the other Docker engine and some of the other orchestrators there, right? And then configuration as a code, Ansible, Puppet, and Chef. Those technologies, if you're familiar with, they enable automation of different workflows, and they bring in a lot of automation, scripting, and that type of stuff. Again, it's a code, but what it enables is configuration, getting into as a code in the overall life cycle of deployment of an application and configuration associated to an application. And then there is this concept of data pipelines, right? Today there is so much of data available in the technology world. You take any type of application, be it social networking related or any other application, right? I'm sure that all of you are working on social platforms. You understand the value of the social platform, and there's so much of conversation happening that there is so much of data which gets generated, right? And that data from the input level, and as it goes up the architectural layers, appearing on the visualization layer, traverses a journey. It is a journey for data to start at one point and reach another point in the overall IT architecture, right? And you need ways to kind of observe when the data flows from point A to point B in your architecture, right? And that type of observability and monitoring aspects of data and automating that flow uh, brings the concept of data pipelines. And data pipelines again are written as a code where you can actually programmatically author, schedule, monitor your data as it flows into your architecture. And there are technologies like Apache Airflow. If some of you are data engineers or data scientists, you would be able to kind of relate to this. And similarly, security as a code, encryption management as a code, there are some examples here. Documentation as a code, this is the most simplest one, and everyone in the industry, irrespective of whether they are working on the application side or data side or infrastructure side or security side or service management side, right? Any part of the industry you go, documentation is needed. And today in the industry, documentation as a code has become a best practice, I would say, right? Take example of platforms like GitHub. They have pages capability that will allow you to document web page style documentation, right, as a code. And it's written down using markdown language, right? What used to be HTML in the past, for those of you who have written your HTML codes in the past, right? Using tags, you build a web page, a simple web page for documentation. Markdown is the modern version, I would say, of formatting your web pages and using that as a code. And it can be managed and version controlled, and all of that good capability exists today. So that's another example of documentation as a code. But the point I'm trying to make is, you see there is so much happening in the world, right? Everything is becoming codified, which means you need to understand that whatever existed as hardware in the past, and technologies kind of took over that traditional way of working, got in the virtualization layer. Now everything is getting software defined and codified because there is need for speed across the IT landscape. So this is an important idea for all of us to understand, and extremely important for those of you who are associated with IT and are looking for futuristic technology adoption and working on futuristic technologies. You should learn at least one programming language today. That's very, very important. And you should be able to bring in skills that will enable you to do code programming using modern approaches, because the world out there is becoming very complex, very advanced, but very simple to use. And simplicity is backed up by a lot of complexity, and you need to understand how the world is changing, right, from a back end complexity point of view. So let me kind of get into DevOps recap here at this juncture, because it's important after elaborating on the problems in the industry and pointing at one of the interesting phenomena of everything as a code, which is emerging in the industry. there needs to be an operating model on top of which all of this needs to be laid out, right? And DevOps, as I said, it's not just technology, but it's also culture and process change in the way traditionally we've been doing software development, right? Traditionally, it was all waterfall based. You used to take requirements from your clients and go to the development team, sit there for 6 to 8 months, come up with a capability, and at the end realize that no, customer did not want that, and you build something else, and then everything goes back in the trash bin, right? So that did not work for the industry, and hence there were a lot of agile new ways of working in the software development field which came in. And in parallel, this DevOps operating model emerged, right? So some of the key concepts that you will come across, and you have to familiarize yourself if you're focused on pursuing this journey of DevOps and DevSecOps, are laid out on this slide. There's a link at the bottom of this page, which is again a public link. You can go there and complete the training material which is available there, and you will get a badge. This is an IBM specific training. But some of the concepts it touches upon, right? Like containers, microservices, 12-factor app. The idea of tool chains is important. So for those of you who are not familiar with tool chains, for implementing DevOps, you need to operate with multiple tools across your software development lifecycle, right? Right from building the code to testing the code, um, to kind of deploying the code or releasing the code, and then monitoring how the application is behaving, all that. The entire DevOps lifecycle will need different tools, right? And at the start, you need a code base that you need, where you can manage your code and all of that. So those tools put together that you're using in your environment to manage the overall DevOps lifecycle are known as tool chains. And the process through which the application is built out is the concept of pipelines, right? So you'll come across tool chains and delivery pipeline. Those are the two important aspects that you need to be familiar with. And then there is this idea of continuous integration and continuous delivery. When you're developing applications, you wouldn't just stop there after building in application to a particular maturity. The need for adding more capability, more functionality, more features is never ending. And you will see that in the modern applications, every week you will come across a new feature or new functionality, right? Be it WhatsApp or any other social platform application like Facebook or Twitter or whatever you're using, you will see new features and new functionality hitting that interface or that platform on a frequent basis. And that needs to be whatever capabilities being built by the developers, it needs to be continuously integrated and continuously delivered to you. So there is the concept of CI/CD, right? And that's very important in the DevOps world. And then you just can't build it and deploy it into production. It needs to go through a series of testing activities, and you need to make sure that your testing is catching the right level of bugs and defects that are in the code, and you're not coming up with vulnerabilities in your code in the production environment, right? So there is, and how do you minimize the impact when you're deploying releases after releases at this rapid pace? So there are methodologies for deployment like blue-green deployment, canary testing, and build to manage those aspects, right? So go through this DevOps concept course at a very high level. It kind of summarizes all the key concepts. There are many other courses that you can go through, but absolutely for you, if you're on the DevSecOps path and you want to focus on DevOps, you need to kind of understand the fundamental concepts of DevOps first. On this slide, I talked about tool chains in the previous slide. On this slide, there is a very nice visualization that digital.ai website has put together. This is again in the public domain. There's nothing confidential about it. I've put the source URL where you can find this periodic table. And the idea of this periodic table is to list out different tools that you would use in the DevOps world today, right? And the tools are classified or categorized into different categories here. You can see there are tools related to AI ops and analytics, artifact management, cloud, collaboration, containers, release management, deployment, continuous integration, security, and so on. I mean, there is so many categories, and this is never ending, right? This ecosystem of tools in the DevOps world has been very rapidly increasing. And I've personally seen sunset of a lot of tools, and there are evolution of a lot of tools which have occurred. And each of the tool that gets released in the market, whether it's open source or it's a free tool or a paid tool or an enterprise class tool, kind of challenges the previous historical tool that existed, and why this one is better than the previous one, right? So there is always this innovation which is occurring, and you will come across many tools. So if you are planning to have a DevOps career, one of the important aspects is you should have foundational understanding of the software development life cycle, how applications get developed and how they get released into production, and how they are managed, right, once they're released, and what are the tools which are involved at different phases of the software development life cycle. And so this kind of summarizes and gives you a neat view of what are those tools or technology platforms that you will come across. And not all of them exist at one go, right? This is a big world. This is still not a complete list, but when you are building applications using DevOps, you will come across at least a bare minimum set of foundational tools that make up your tool chain and then enable that pipeline based approach for development of software. So this is a good view. This is the last slide on DevOps, and then we'll jump into DevSecOps. And I promise that. So the idea here is I've picked up this example from Azure. So if you're familiar with Microsoft Azure Cloud, this approach that is described here on this slide shows you what a DevOps pipeline would look like, or what are the different tools that are involved and different phases you go through when you're building an application, right? So let's say you're building a .NET application. There needs to be a source code management tool there, or a platform that can look at manage your code, look at aspects like what are the code changes which are occurring. And then once you are done with all the code changes necessary for that release, there should be an automated process of picking up that code and building that application into a package that can be then deployed onto the infrastructure, right? So that is the process of build with pipeline automation. And then you also need container images, which are those templates which are already done for you from a security and infrastructure point of view. So you combine that application code, and then you deploy that on a particular container. It could be an automated process or a manual process, and ultimately you release that application or that software into your dev environment. Then you test it in the dev environment. Everything goes well, you move it to UAT, get on some users who can do the testing of your application, and then you move it into production, right, where your actual end users consume that application and they can see the releases. So this is a typical operating model that DevOps implements. And so what is important for all of you is to understand what DevOps is and how DevOps works. And then very important understanding in the DevOps world is the concept of a pipeline. And it's okay if you're not able to read into this slide, any which is, I think the slides and recording will be made available. But what you see here are different pipes. Okay, each of these pipes represents a pipeline. And what's inside the circles that you see inside each of these pipe is the software development life cycle. So you have plan, you have design, you have code, you have build, test, sign, release, deploy, and operate. And this life cycle of software development is not just related to application, because we said everything as a code is the new form in which the modern technology stack is being built out, right? So what you need is when everything becomes software defined, you're able to do software defined network, you're able to do software defined storage, you're able to do software defined compute. And for each of these aspects of architecture, you have a pipeline or an automated approach that sets that up for you when you have the need to deploy that particular component, right? And so the infrastructure is always at the base foundational level. Then you need images, like your container images, your middleware images, your VM images, whatever have been built out based on your enterprise compliance and regulatory requirements. So there is a set of pipeline for building your images, and then or deploying your images, and then there is this application stack pipeline, right? So if you're deploying a mainframe app, you need a pipeline for that. If you're building a custom Java app, you need a pipeline for that. For your mobile development, you need a pipeline for that. And each of these pipes are automated, right? And that's where the concept of pipeline comes in. So what I'm showing here is the concept of the master pipeline. So imagine there is one pipeline, and then there is these child pipelines. Today what we are also able to do is, in the application world, in the modern application world, you just have to trigger this master pipeline when you update your code, and it will automatically within few minutes deploy your infrastructure, your images, your application, and you're ready. And it can hit any target environment that you like it to hit, right? Let me give you a realistic example. What I showed you was a technical view of how pipeline works in DevOps, right? But imagine that you're working for Netflix, or you're working for, let's say, any other content company who is producing content for public consumption. Netflix is a good example. You wouldn't have movies which have been there for ages. You need new content every day. In fact, every few hours, Netflix kind of publishes new content. What that means is that Netflix application needs to run a pipeline which can fetch the latest content that their developers or their research or their analytics or their cognitive technology solution is proposing that users will consume on the other side. So in the traditional world, what if you were a change, if you were part of service management, right? And if you were doing, let's say, change management, the idea was that you had to first create a change record. You had to take it to the change advisory board for the necessary approvals. There used to be back and forth before the change used to get approved. Finally, once the change is approved, then you need to find the change implementer who will implement the change. And then you need to kind of make sure that all the environment variables and everything is available, and then the change gets executed. This entire process used to take weeks and months sometimes, right, for critical changes, those of you who are familiar with change management. But in today's context of Netflix that I described, you may have to do 10,000 changes in a day. Imagine the life of a change manager who is in middle of this and has to do 10,000 changes in a day. Can it be done humanly? It's not possible. You need technology and automation to be able to take care of such large scope, right? So what pipelines and the concept of pipelines in DevOps does is it gives you that operating model in which, if you have a proper DevOps ecosystem established, you can release changes every few hours, every few minutes, right? Depending on what your application is and how frequently you're pushing updates. That's the beauty of technology and how technology has emerged over years, right? Does not take more than weeks and months before a change can be established. You can do changes and deploy releases every minute. That's the beauty of technology. And all of that, pipeline plays an important role, right? So all you have to do is you trigger this master pipeline, it will deploy your infra, image, and application in the target environment, and you see the change. Okay, so that was DevOps, and let's close the DevOps chapter there, right? I want to focus on DevSecOps because that's the new phenomena which is occurring in the industry. And let me introduce the shift here, right? So I pointed out earlier in the start of my presentation that security is always dealt towards the end of the software development lifecycle in the traditional approach, right? In the end, application teams will come and say, hey, Mr. Security Professional, can you check whether I can go live with my application? And security professional used to say, no, there are these 10 requirements that you're not complying with. Go back and redo your architecture and come back. To avoid that, what we are doing is, in the DevSecOps world, you're shifting security towards left. So the typical software development lifecycle starts from planning for the application, right? There's a requirement gathering phase where you require, where you gather the requirements that are needed for your application. You're introducing security from there itself, rather than waiting for deploy stage where the security is dealt in the traditional world. You're looking at security requirements at all stages of your software development lifecycle. So in plan, there will be some security requirements. Code, there will be some security requirements. Build, there will be some security requirement. Test, you will have to fulfill some security requirements. And by the time you come to the deploy decision, you're already security compliant. And that's the idea of infusing security into DevOps, and how DevSecOps comes into play, right? So you're able to develop securely, and you're able to secure your operations holistically, end to end, across the life cycle. And this is very, very important. Understanding this shift that security is now being dealt with at every stage of the security development life cycle is extremely important. For those of you who are security professionals, this is a good news for you, because security is becoming very, very critical in the new modern age of complex distributed computing. Okay, so let me elaborate on DevSecOps a little more, right? I'll go to the next level of details. So DevSecOps, which is development, security, and operations, has to be dealt at the infrastructure level. It needs to be dealt at the data level, and it needs to be dealt at an application level as well. So you have hybrid infrastructure, you have data, and this could be different type of data. There is data at rest, which is sitting in your databases. There could be real-time data coming from your event monitoring systems and stuff like that. And then you're dealing with, in today's world, cloud native applications, right? So microservices, modern applications, that's the story today. And at all of these, you need security. You need infrastructure security, data security. For modern applications which are containerized, you need container security. You need secure code engineering, right? When you are building code, how do you make your code secure right at the development phase, when you are actually writing the code, right? When you do the actual programming, how do you secure it? And then application security, how do you kind of test out application against vulnerabilities and make sure that it is secure and it's not hackable and stuff like that. So emergence of these three streams comes into play: infrastructure DevSecOps, data ops, which is related to data, and then you have application DevSecOps, right? An enterprise solution today will need a professional who is operating in the DevSecOps space to understand this full breadth and depth of architecture, right? So if you are a DevSecOps professional, one, you need to understand the application development lifecycle. You need not be a coder or a programmer, but you need to know the software development lifecycle. You need to know what are the infrastructure security requirements. You need to know what are the data security requirements, and you need to know what's there in the application layer, right? Application data secure application security requirements. So and that is the richness of this role, or all the roles which exist in the DevSecOps space. They are becoming more highly skilled. So I see a lot of people coming up to me and telling me that, Moini, I was a project manager and I've done traditional project management. Can you chalk out a way for me, or give me some career guidance on where I need to move, right? And there are a lot of roles in the industry which needs to upskill themselves, and that need is very real and important. If you have not started doing that 2-3 years back, then you're already kind of very, very late. And one request from my side is, look into this transformation which is occurring in the industry, right? And if you don't realize that you need to upskill yourself now, then it will be too late before you realize that the job you were performing in the traditional world does not exist anymore, right? So that realization has to be there from within, and that's very important. I want to I touched upon infrastructure piece and application piece. I want to bring your focus to data a little bit, right? And that's another important area. We spoke about DevOps, and we looked at the typical DevOps lifecycle, which is develop, orchestrate, test, deploy, and monitor.
And then you have these aspects of continuous integration and continuous deployment, right? How do you do that continuously? So DevOps is the goal of DevOps is to increase the velocity at which you're bringing in features in your application. So it can speed up the process because it's totally automated. Your code can flow in through this DevOps pipeline, and it can reach the production deployment stage, and you can continue to monitor your application. Data ops is another very important technology area which is emerging, and it's part of the emerging technologies. If you follow Gartner and look at the magic quadrant and some of the emerging technologies, you will realize that data ops is mentioned as one of the emerging technologies area. What happens is, when data is important for all systems today, right? Everyone agrees to that. But in the traditional world, observing data and flow of data was very difficult. So data ops enables you to integrate your application or your platform with multiple data sources, observe the data flow, catalog the data that you are using within your solution, and they will. Sorry, was there a question? Okay. So yeah, so data ops is about operating on data, right? And how do you integrate data? How do you orchestrate, ingest data for the upper layers of your architecture, like machine learning and cognitive to work? And then how do you infuse, bring in AI into your solutions using data? So data ops is all about that. When you get a chance, go look at data ops and how do you kind of um, go study data ops, because this is another important, interesting area. Now, I'll next 2-3 slides, I'm going to touch upon a little more deeper on the DevSecOps space. I'll try to be as clear and simple as possible so that you can understand at least at a very, very high level. So if I have to, I spoke about shifting security to left, right? Moving from DevOps to a DevSecOps type of operating model. The current scenario in the industry is that cyber resilience and security is not brought in until the end, right? So you'll see that in the advise, plan, develop, build phases, there's no formal security practices which are infused, and it comes only towards the end. So what type of security requirements that come into play, right? In the test, release, deploy phase, or in the operate, manage phase. In the test, release, deploy phase, you look at some of the compliance check. You do dynamic application security testing or integrated application security testing. Or in the operate phase, you look at vulnerability management. For those of you who are in infrastructure management space, you've been doing patch management for a long time, or at least you're hearing about patch management for a long time. All these are like stuff that that come into towards the end of the life cycle, right? Now this is completely changing with DevSecOps, and the idea is shifting security to left. So these phases which were unattended from a security point of view, or minimally attended from a security point of view, now will be having security practices infused at every stage, right? For example, in the advice phase, when you advise a customer or a client, you need to make sure that they have the right security requirements and security architecture baked into their overall plan, right? In the strategy. And then when you actually build the plan, you should make sure that you have that security architecture, you do the threat modeling, you do the risk analysis. And some of these practices are now industry proven practices. You guys can take a zoomed in look at each of these, because we'll not have time to describe and discuss each of these today. But the idea is that at every stage now, there is requirement for security, and especially with microservices based application architectures, right, where you have to deal with 10, 20, 100 microservices which compose an application. Each microservice has to go through this life cycle of DevSecOps. And without that level of automation, you will never be able to achieve that security, right? So there's a lot of automation and tooling available to accomplish it. But the idea is that you do some critical aspects, right? Code quality, for example. When you look at a code, and if you're a programmer or a developer, you will write some of the code on your own, and you will depend on some of the libraries from external entities. It could be open source or it could be any other entity. And there has to be always this check on, if you are dependent on external libraries, are those libraries secure for your application, right? Are they vulnerable? Someone has to tell you that. And there is that tooling and automation available today that can do that today. So in the develop and build phase, there are practices like those that you need to bring in. And then if you're using open source, you should be able to do an OSS scan for open source code and look at whether that has any vulnerabilities, right? Or over a period of time, has it become, are there any code smells, or there are any issues with that code, and how do you kind of replace that? And then in the test and release deploy phases, more stringent security is getting introduced, right? So automated provisioning of cyber resilience technologies, policies that the organization wants to drive, all of this is coming in. So we'll see in the modern enterprise space, more secure, more flexible type of applications coming into play. And then in the space, some of the practices plus this concept of continuous compliance and automated remediation, all of that are coming into play. So this is a point of view on how security is being introduced into all the DevOps life cycles and how DevOps is transforming into DevSecOps. Now I'll touch upon two reference architectures just so that it, you know that this is real and this is happening, right? So this is a DevSecOps reference architecture from Red Hat. And this is again publicly available. I've added the link at the bottom of this page. You can go read about it in little more detail. But you see across this software development lifecycle, right? Code, build, test, release, deploy, operate, monitor, and optimize. Red Hat is using certain open source products that they have built out, like Red Hat Code Ready, Red Hat Quay, Red Hat OpenShift. And all of these ingrain those practices that are needed, like you do source code analysis, or you do SaaS testing, or you need to manage your secrets in a vault. All of that is done within these products, right? So this is a reference architecture from a DevSecOps point of view that Red Hat is proposing, right? If you're using Red Hat solutions, this is the reference architecture you need to use. And across the tool chains, you will come across an integrated development environment. You need to have a source code management tool. You need to build, you need a build automation tool. You need container registry. You need binary registry. For container orchestration, you need Red Hat OpenShift, that platform, right, from a Red Hat perspective. And then you need to be able to monitor and operate on your clusters that you deploy, the container clusters that you deploy using Red Hat OpenShift. So this is Red Hat reference architecture. And then you've got one more that I've added here for your reference, which is Azure reference architecture, right? Which is again one of the hyperscalers in the market. And you can see that they also infuse security at all stages, right? So, right, if you look at this persona of a developer, when developer is writing code and committing it in GitHub, yeah, they are managing using Kanban boards. But as the code gets written, there are GitHub advanced security capabilities which kind of suggest to the developers if they're using any vulnerable libraries or dependencies that they have used in their code which are vulnerable. All of these tools and solutions will alert them automatically at that stage when they do the commit of their code, right? And they have to go back and rectify their code then and there. So you see there is no human security professional presence here, but the technology and tooling itself is guiding that behavior to become more secure. And that's where our understanding of technology and new technology solutions is very important, right, from a security standpoint, because security will and is getting injected at every stage, and it's very, very important for us to understand that. Then code goes through the pipeline for your build, and then it takes the container registry images for your containers, deploys it onto Azure Kubernetes service, which is your container infrastructure. And then you actually can monitor using Azure Monitor. If you have a database like Cosmos DB, you can use that. And then through application gateway, the end user can access your application, right? And the Azure pipelines you see are bringing in infrastructure as a code from your Terraform technologies. So you should be familiar with all of these when you're operating on DevSecOps reference architecture. And this is real. This is happening right now, as I pointed out, right? Similar architectures are available for AWS, for Oracle Cloud, for IBM Cloud. You name the hyperscaler, everyone has a DevSecOps reference architecture. And when you're dealing with multiple clouds, which is the world I come from, multi-cloud management, you need to understand all of this, right? And that's very, very critical. And without understanding this technology, you cannot move an inch in front of a customer. You have to have deep knowledge in each of these areas, and you will have to build it step by step, right? Nothing is going to be built in a day. So you have to put that focus, that determination to learn and understand this shift which is occurring. This diagram I have put intentionally not to fear you, but this is the real world example. Again, this is available in the public domain. You can go to this website. They have done a fantastic job of documenting this. But this is how a real DevSecOps hybrid reference architecture for an enterprise customer looks like. You have personas, you have different tools which are being used at every stage. There are automated pipelines which are available, which will move you from point A to point B, different technologies that you can work to understand what's happening and establish that observability, right? And as a DevOps or DevSecOps professional, this understanding such a technology architecture roadmap is very, very critical. So go look at this. I'm not going to go into too much of details because I want to spend some time on the career aspects as well. So let's talk about DevSecOps careers for a bit. I've listed out here these 6 roles, which are very modern roles, I would say. Some of these existed in the traditional world or continue to exist in the traditional world in a different form or shape, right? So I have Craig, who is a DevOps developer. Shelby, she's a DevOps engineer. And the difference between DevOps developer and DevOps engineer is DevOps developer is actually the one who is developing the DevOps operating model for an enterprise. So this guy is responsible for setting up the whole DevOps implementation. DevOps engineer is the one who operates on top of that DevOps operating model, which means these are the ones who are responsible for checking, taking the new releases which have been checked in, passing them through the pipeline, initiating those pipelines, and deploying that in the production world, right? Then there is another very, very interesting role which Google kind of introduced in the industry and is being adopted across in the industry. That is the site reliability engineer role, right? SRE role. I think someone is talking. Can you go on mute, please, if you're not speaking? Thank you. SRE is another important role. Then you have got security SME, technical SME, and hybrid IT architect role, right? Today, for this talk, I'm going to touch upon these 3 roles very, very quickly and show you some of the life in a day of each of these, right? So DevOps engineer, site reliability engineer, and security SME. So first, let's take Shelby. And again, this presentation, I expect that it will be made available to you guys, so you can always take a look at it. But Shelby, as a DevOps engineer, is responsible for supporting all the domains which exist in the DevOps world, right? And engages in a wide variety of cloud adoption, cloud migration type of activities today. And using the DevOps model, right, is able to kind of collectively work with partners, developers, and ensure that the monitoring and operations teams are able to support that and address that. Key responsibilities include working in agile ecosystems, building, deploying, configuring, maintaining systems, include software installations, problem identification, system architecture. So you can see there is an extensive set of skills and capability which is needed to be part of this role, right? And this is an extension from the traditional system admin type of thinking into a very modern type of thinking, right? And operating across a DevOps cycle. And some of the key challenges really are looking at compliance requirements, because compliance has to be dealt at every stage now with DevSecOps, working around cumbersome IT processes, simplifying them, driving adoption for new software development practices, 12-factor app. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but building an app, those 12-factor app practices are very important, right? And go read about it. But that's the role of a DevOps engineer. Site reliability engineer is again a master of all trades, I would say, right? Collaborates with development and build teams and make sure there is right level of automation introduced. So the key task includes automation, and integration of infrastructure as a service and PaaS services into the DevOps pipelines. All these are new roles. If you have not heard about them, go read about them. Extensive information is available in the public domain about these roles, what challenges they come across, right, and how they kind of are making a difference in the enterprise scenario. And it's important for some of us who are working in the traditional world to map our career into a particular role that you can see here, and then upskill yourself in some of those technologies. And then similarly, there is a security SME role, right? And security specialists have been there for a long time, but now their role in automating security is becoming more important. So they also have to learn code. They need to understand how can they secure cloud native technologies like containers, and how do they do security configuration infusion into the overall DevSecOps lifecycle. So they have a totally different set of challenges and some of those aspects that they go through. And so I was doing this morning a job search on DevSecOps, right, and looking at what are the jobs. When I googled it out, in near Hyderabad, I could see there were 98 active job vacancies. When I looked at Naukri.com, there were like 5,400 plus jobs spread across India in DevSecOps space. And on LinkedIn also, there were like close to 1,000 jobs, right, which are active currently. So there is definitely a big scope in this space, and something that we need to kind of get our community talent to participate in and kind of inherit some of these skills. Also, I've added some of the learning resources, which are more detailed learning programs for those of you who are interested in doing DevSecOps, right? You can go to this site, Plural site. There is a link for this course. It gives you 1 month subscription free, but later on you need to pay and kind of go through some of these, right? But if you're able to finish it within that timeline, that's good. Similarly, LinkedIn is offering a 6 hours detailed training program on DevSecOps. And there are many other digital learning platforms who are offering DevSecOps training. um, and the focus and emphasis is around um, helping you build your DevOps basics and getting into advanced security aspects, right? And how do you do DevSecOps? What are the best practices? How do you automate security and build secure CI/CD pipelines? That type of content is available. So this is again open for your reference. You can take a look at it. There are also, for those of you who want to get certified, there are certifications available from lot of other organizations outside in the public domain. Some of these are listed out here. You can check these out. And here is the advice, right, on the certification piece. And this is very important. Um, as a DevSecOps professional, you need to have more than one skill at a point, and that's true for all other technology professionals, right? You need to be multifaceted. You should have those skills that will make you successful in your job. You cannot stick to one single skill and imagine that you will survive in future. That's not how the technology industry at least is driving things. So you need to be multifaceted, multi-skilled. This one most important advice is you need to get hands-on practice, right, of your theoretical learnings. And some of the concepts I described today, I did not intentionally touch upon any practical demos or something like that. I want to, because there's an ocean out there, I cannot complete that in 1.5 hours. The idea was to run you through what's happening in the industry in this space and make sure that you at least get excited about it and go do some hands-on and real learning around DevSecOps. And then another important thing is before you jump into DevSecOps, you need to have, I would say, at least intermediate level knowledge on DevOps and how it is changing the culture in the organization, right? Getting that understanding is very important. And without understanding the shift from traditional into DevOps and from DevOps into DevSecOps, you wouldn't be able to play a big role. But once you understand that, I can promise you, you will become head of DevSecOps in whatever organization you're working in, right? That's very, very important. Okay, so let's have some time for question and answers. I think we can open up for some questions, and I'll be happy to answer some of them. Say bye.
Yeah, Jazakallah. I think there are a couple of questions in the chat window as well. So one question is from Mujib Khan. I think you spoke about Yasari. So he was asking about Yasari. Is it a branch of DevOps only?
Yeah, good question. And it's very important, right? DevOps or DevSecOps is an operating model. It will need multiple roles to accomplish that operating model. SRE, Site Reliability Engineer, is a very critical role which is emerging in the industry, which is focused on multiple tenants, right? Specifically around observability, monitoring, and then automation. They bring in a lot of value. And if you go read the Google books on SREs, you will find how they solve aspects like availability, monitoring, observability, all of that. There's a very detailed book written by Google. It's available free of cost on the Google website. Go look at that. But two main aspects that SREs solve in the overall DevSecOps lifecycle is they will help you mitigate any advanced level issues in your environment, in the run phase of your environment. And because their focus is on automation, they will help you eliminate the toil, right? So there is this concept of managing toil and eliminating toil. Managing toil is the idea of ensuring your current set of business and operations continues to be managed and is maintained at an optimal agreed level. Eliminating toil is SRE would look at whatever is being done manually today and is of repetitive nature. They will become the automation architects in your ecosystem. They will eliminate that manual task which is being done in your organization by bringing in automation technologies across infrastructure, data, and application space. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Jazakallah. So there is another question here from Shakil Bhai. So he worked for IBM. He's having 12 years of experience in Windows system administration. And he has knowledge on Azure, and he wants to upscale in the infrastructure environment. So he is seeking your advice here.
Okay, again, good question. This is a very common question which comes from our system admins, right? So advice number one, you need to become multi-skilled. And I think you've already taken the first step by getting into Azure. Because if you're a Windows system admin, when you get into Azure, you have to now deal with storage, compute, networking, everything within Azure, right? That's the first shift that you see. Now, the second advice to you is, and you talked about cloud. Cloud is a big umbrella. So within cloud, you need to get to multi-cloud skills, because every customer we come across or enterprise we come across today, no one is dealing with one single cloud, or they don't make one single cloud their favorite simply because they don't want to get logged in into that cloud, right? So if you are certified on Azure and you understand Azure better now, go learn AWS, IBM Cloud, Google Cloud, Oracle Cloud, and expand your breadth in the multi-cloud world, because multi-cloud is the future, and multi-cloud is happening right now with significant, almost 80% of the industry, the clients we interact with, there is multi-cloud. Okay, so establish that, and then also start looking at some of these niche skills, right? Like DevOps or SRE is a niche role. How can you get to that? Because that is going to stay for a long time, and you need to get to that. So, and there is a lot of learning guidance available for getting into those roles. You can Google out, you can reach out to some of the experts, and more than happy to help. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Mohammed, thanks very much. Do you have any courses within IBM where we can learn?
IBM, you have an ocean of courses. You go to there's a learning portal within IBM. You can look for Udemy link within IBM. You will be able to access free courses on Udemy.
Okay. Thanks very much for the suggestion.
Yeah, I think there was a complaint on the links that were shared along with the slides, right? So they were not visible. So Brother Sadiq is asking to share those links so that they can explore later as well.
Yeah, that's a question more for us to share the slide. Definitely,
Yeah.
organizers can take a call on that. I'll send the slides over to the team.
Okay, so I think Mohammed Naina Bhai has left. He has some urgency. If he's still there, you can ask. So basically, he's looking for some courses to enroll for getting into the jobs. So he has 20 years of experience in networking and security. So I have note down his number. So maybe we can share him on his WhatsApp.
Yeah, the learning links for the learning courses I've already attached in the slides. So that can be used as a basic foundational courses.
Okay. And there is a question from, okay, Mohammed Danish Bhai. So you have mentioned SDLC knowledge is needed for jobs. For an infra admin, what level of knowledge is needed? Any topics, references, or leads, please?
Yeah, that's a very good question, right? That's the disruption which is occurring in the industry today. And with DevSecOps, you will see that infrastructure, data, and application, that stack is being dealt as one single entity. Whereas traditionally it was being dealt, infrastructure was being dealt separately, right? So we used to have infrastructure specialists in different streams like platform, Wintel or Unix, and then storage and middleware and all of that. That is getting slowly moved away into multi-skills, right? So even in the infrastructure space, there are modern technologies which are taking over, like containerization or serverless, and there's a lot of scope to learn there. So you should focus on some of those modern infrastructure orchestration capabilities. Definitely for infrastructure admin, the need today right now is to support containerized applications. If you've not dealt with that, go learn containers, go learn Kubernetes, and multi-cloud management skills, right? Those are very, very important. And futuristic, you should also learn serverless computing, technologies like functions. Each of the hyperscale providers have that today, right? So you should look up some of those technologies that are very, very vital in the infrastructure space. But I suggest you also keep your eye on the data and the application side, because the technology is kind of moving into edge, and there's a lot of focus on all the three aspects coming together. There's convergence happening there. Hope that answers your question.
Okay. So another question, like he want your suggestions to move from or transform from test lead to DevOps.
Okay, that's a good one, because there's a lot of testing which occurs in the DevOps space, and there is a lot of automated testing which needs to come into play, right? So there are a lot of automated testing design type of skills which are needed in the DevSecOps space. If you build a strong foundation on your testing skills and look at how can you do security testing, how can you do automated application testing, how can you do automated infrastructure testing and harden infrastructure, those will by default induct you into the overall DevSecOps lifecycle. And you will, once you have those skills and you demonstrate those, right, you will automatically be recognized in your ecosystem as an expert in that area.
So there is another question from my sister. She has said salam to you, and she's asking, I come from BPO sector and now I'm keen to get into IT. Could you please suggest me? where can I start?
Sure. Walaikum salam. So for those, I started with BPO almost 20 years back. Today I'm in technology. I'm a technology director. Um, so what you really strengthen, right, as part of working in BPO is your communication, your presentation skills. What you need to start doing is also start learning foundational technologies like you have cloud, you have blockchain, you have IoT, you have edge computing. These 4 or 5 areas in technology are very, very important. So you should go first read Gartner's report on what are the 5 emerging technology trends in 2021. That will give you a good idea of where the industry is heading, and start looking for some opportunities or initiatives within your existing enterprise which are technology oriented, right, which will help you um, go participate as a contributor. You might not be a leader or an architect or a technical person, but at least if you get a chance to look at some of those technology initiatives, right, that will be very helpful. So Gartner top 5 trends for 2021 from a technology standpoint, look at that. Start learning foundational technologies, 4 of them that I mentioned: cloud, blockchain, IoT, edge computing. Those are very important. And then uh, try to see if you can get a foundational certification in at least one of the cloud providers, Azure or AWS or Google or IBM Cloud, doesn't matter. But that will give you a good sense of foundations of technology. And from there, you can chalk your path into senior roles, right, into the technology area.
Jazakallah. So there is another question from Brother Parvesh Shah. So how does big data platform maps into DevSecOps?
Yeah, very good question. I touched upon data ops, and intentionally I wanted to do that. Big data and data ops have a very, very close relationship. Big data is the volume of data which is sitting out there. Data ops picks up that data and transforms that eventually into meaningful information, right? So the whole journey that the data traverses from that big data sitting out there, connecting to different data sources, transforming that data into what is needed in the upper layers of the system, running it through machine learning and cognitive models to generate insights, and then eventually showing that intelligent information out on the visualization layer that you create in your architecture. That is how the data ops pipelines operate. And so data ops is an integral part of DevSecOps. And especially some of the security practices like how do you encrypt, how do you isolate data which is regulated in nature, and all of that will play a vital role within and comes from the DevSecOps world, right, of security practices and data pipelines.
Jazakallah. So I think another question from Brother Rafi, which is similar to earlier question. So he's having 10 years of experience in the BPO sector and looking into change to DevOps domain. Yes.
Yeah, so I answered the question for sister. The response is very similar. For those of you who come from the BPO side, you should make sure, because your field enables you with good presentation and communication skills, you should leverage those and start participating in learning foundational technology aspects. Cloud, IoT, edge computing, blockchain are those areas in which you can venture out. Cloud is very big in India. I mean, of course, there are other technology areas as well, but cloud technical professionals are significantly high. So and it's very easy to get learning around cloud and all of that, right? So get foundational certified, and then look for opportunities and initiatives that you can participate in that will enable you to grow. Whenever there is an opportunity, you can grab that.
Okay. Jazakallah. I think there is a link where the courses are there that has been shared. Please make a note of that. And there is a question from Namatullah Bhai whether slides will be shared. I think recording will be available in tinyurl/mfrds. So the entire session recording will be there. So hope that will be helpful. And there is another question from Brother Amir, how AI ML is used in DevOps or SecOps? What are the current challenges for adopting AI ML in security ops that came across?
Okay, good question. So data ops, which is again another wing of DevSecOps, it builds the foundation for two solutions in the analytics space, I would say, right? So one, when you look at analytics solutions today, there is a business intelligence type set where you actually get to see reports and dashboards and all of that. And then there is AI ML, which is known as model ops type of solutions, where you actually use machine learning and AI algorithms to generate intelligence from the data. So significant challenge today is any AI ML platform or solution that you're building will take at least 8 to 10 years for generating meaningful and highly calibrated and sharp insights. That period can be reduced with technologies like DevSecOps. If you have a proper DevSecOps operating model using data ops, you can cut down that time which used to take 8 to 10 years and do your analysis much more faster for the AI and ML layers of your solution to kind of operate quickly, right? And that way there's a significant benefit, but that's the challenge as well today, right? That how do you kind of cut down that 8 to 10 years duration for a AI led solution? And as data ops becomes more evident, because still an emerging technology, that problem will also get solved.
Jazakallah. So any more questions?
Brother, this is Imdad here. I have a question. So we have as a startup team with a lean focus on getting up to speed and delivering capabilities for customers. So we have a challenge when looking at the list of technologies that are supported in DevOps. We are starting with DevOps, not yet gone to DevSecOps, but as a solution hosted on Google Cloud, we are forced to take DevSecOps into consideration as well. So do you have a recommendation? We want to be a multi-cloud based solution for our customers. So the challenge is we don't have the resources to have so many people doing the to try to analyze the tools that are required and then come up with a solution. Is the Red Hat solution standardized that we can adopt? It provides a multi-cloud kind of concept which we can use, and then we can deploy in multiple cloud environments. So do you suggest going ahead with that Red Hat kind of solution instead of investing time into finding out which technologies fits in for a lean team which basically does not have the budget and resource to do this analysis and define what kind of security tools that we need to implement in our product?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that's the challenge that is articulated quite a number of times. It's a very common scenario. Here are my two recommendations for you, right? One is standardize in terms of your DevOps maturity. First, standardize your tool chains, and the tool chains can be based off Google's DevSecOps reference architecture. I'll try and send the link over to you, but you can also have a hybrid tool chain, right? The idea is that you should be able to bring your application faster to the market, and other underlying tenants are security, of course, and some of the other standards you want to maintain. Because you're a startup organization, I don't expect you to be very mature in your DevOps process at this point in time, but at least get to foundational set of tooling that works for you. For example, for your code base or source code management, you should use something as simple as GitHub. And GitHub is available, of course, in different versions, right? Community edition and enterprise edition and a public edition as well. And depending on what you've subscribed to, you will have different capability as well. So first, look at the end goal that you're trying to achieve. And if your anticipated outcome is you want to bring an application faster to market using CI/CD, Establish that continuous integration, continuous development solution using standard DevOps tools. And you need not bring in advanced aspects that that can add more human resource or complexity to your current environment, right? So first achieve that basic foundational end-to-end pipeline-based approach. Also, see if you can do everything in the containerized world. So whatever application focus you have, if it is containerized, then you will have a lot of cloud native development best practices that will help you solve your existing technology or toolchain problem. By using tools like GitHub, right? And there are other open source tools as well. You need not just focus on Red Hat, but look at the Sonatype architecture that I showed you, and that website describes many tools. Pick up some of the open source ones that are used widely and try to adopt those to complete your toolchain. The moment you complete your toolchain and you have a pipeline running, then you can worry about taking it to the next level of maturity. Then you can hit level 2, level 3, maybe after an year, where you can bring in more automation, more expertise, and all of that. You can do automated testing, automated security assessments, and stuff like that. So that's my first advice. Second advice is get your team to get your team certified to a basic DevSecOps or DevOps certification, because hands-on is important. Startup, I've generally seen that you have fresh blood, they're energetic, excited people who want to learn and grow, and you have to enable that ecosystem for them, right, for learning. So maybe partnering with a small digital learning organization, or getting them a subscription on DevOps, which can enable them to do hands-on and continuously build skills, will help you. And of course, you have to assess how much toll it takes on your current workload, right? Because in a startup, of course, you're maniacally busy in accomplishing your goals, and there is very limited focus on skill development and learning. You should slowly introduce that skill development and learning aspect in your ecosystem. That will help.
Okay. Okay, Jazakallah. I understand the overall suggestion that you're giving. So for us, the challenge was 1 or 2 people focusing on infrastructure and also managing the current production. But it makes sense what you have suggested there. Jazakallah.
Good. So any further questions?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
My name is Syed Hidayat.
Yeah, please go ahead.
The question is, I run a startup IT company, concentration more on cloud deployment and implementation.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay, I have a question like any companies who wants to outsource their projects. So you know any companies?
Yeah, that's a good question. You have to elaborate a little more. When you say outsource, what type of outsourcing do you?
For example, if they want to set up their on-premises to migration to cloud, that one type of project. And the second is if they are coming up with a completely new setup on cloud, so we can help both.
So help me understand your question again. Are you telling that you want to know companies who take outsourcing deals, and your companies like yours can provide that offering to them? Or
yes, you're right.
Yeah, I don't think I'm the right person to answer that. Maybe Sayed Bhai can answer that.
Yeah.
It's a market research question that you're asking, so you need to maybe tie up with some venture capitalists or something like that.
No, I'm not looking for funds. I'm looking for projects.
Yeah, I think Brother Hidayat, you need to like reach out to the people. Means you should collaborate with other startups, how they are getting the project, right? So those forums we need to target. So I think we can take it offline, how that goes.
Okay. Okay. Anywhere I can contact you, Officer
Yeah,
Bhai?
fine. You can note down my number.
Yeah, tell me.
I have shared it. The
Thank you.
Jazakallah. So any other question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, Assalamu
Good.
alaikum.
Walaikum
Well, just want to thank the speaker. I think it was a wonderful session. I think most of the doubts were cleared, and we have like information, where you want to go. So basically, I am from the switching, routing, and security background. So I was planning to do certifications in cyber security and stuff. So cyber security, what is, like, shall I proceed with that? So what is the, link between sec DevOps and cyber security stuff? So is it the right approach, like do certifications in cyber security and then the natural progression will be sec DevOps kind of thing?
Yeah, I can take that. Walaikum salam. So I think you should continue to pursue your security specialization, because security specialist as a role is going to be very important in the DevSecOps space. I think where your skills will be leveraged is whenever you're building security automation in areas like container management and stuff like that. There is uh, of course this idea of security policies, and how do you infuse security policies into your security configuration, right? So what type of IP address schemes you need to use, what type of routes you need to use, all of that will be designed both from a networking and security standpoint when you set up that container orchestration capability within your environment. So absolutely you should go for your security certifications if you're on CIS SSP or that type of certification path. You will always see the need for such security professionals in the industry. And two areas where you should look at is how does container security management happen, and that will give you answer both from a security and networking point of view. And the other area is in the serverless world, both data in transit and data at rest. How do you kind of what type of security policies and controls you implement, right? Having practically, that's a good area to look at. So you are in the right track. My suggestion is you should continue your security certification. And when you're operating in an organization which is working on DevSecOps operating model, need for a security architecture and security SME is always there. So you can always contribute there.
Thank you, Jazakallah.
Jazakallah. So any other question?
Hello, Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
This is Fasiullah Khan. My question is, like, I am working in a database, DB centric, from past 20 years in the programming and development and as well maintenance of this. So my question is, like, how my profile sets into this DevSecOps?
Yeah, good question. So again, as I said, right, enterprise stack is inclusive of infrastructure, data, and application. An application architecture will always have need for databases. Your stream, because it is in databases, the data ops and data transformation, data governance will be a very important area, right? Data transformation, specifically when you do ETLs or that type of logic you build, right? You need to understand database schema, how your database is, and what data models you're using within an application, and how does the data transformation occur. So when you build data ops, you can significantly contribute there. Yours is a very specialized area because database technologies have also progressed, right? From SQL to
Yes.
NoSQL and some of those. are very evidently needed. So you should familiarize yourself with uh, latest database technologies, and almost all the hyperscalers provide different type of databases, right, depending on what operations you're performing, in memory or compute intensive, or whatever type of structured, unstructured, all of that you will be required as part of the data ops space.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any further questions? MashaAllah. So if no questions, I think I'll take opportunity to thank Abdul Qadeer Moini Bhai. MashaAllah, very interesting, very amazing session. So beautiful slides you came up, MashaAllah. And it has covered entire scope there with respect to the DevSecOps. At least I should say the word correctly now. So we have learned the DevOps, SecOps, and DevSecOps. It's a great marriage between DevOps and SecOps, right? So I think the time which we have taken out today has fetched a lot of fruits to take home. And I think this should continue every week. We have a lot of interesting topics coming every week. So for the recordings that already those sessions has happened, so you can reach out to tinyurl/mfid, and if anyone is interested to share his experience, because alhamdulillah we have seen many experienced people here in their areas, so you can come forward and share your experience as well. And you can also invite others to make use of this opportunity, where a lot of experienced people are coming and taking out their time and delivering their expertise. So it's a great opportunity for all of us. So we should make use of this forum to the fullest. So I think with these words, I thank everyone for taking out your time. And I thank especially Moini Bhai for taking out your special time and coming up with beautiful slides covering the and a beautiful DevOps periodic table, which we saw for the first time. A very interesting table. I think we have gone back to our olden days of the periodic table in the chemistry, right? So still people are remembering them. So now we need to start learning about this new periodic table, but this looks to be very dynamic. So it keeps changing, right?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Jazakallah.
I enjoyed speaking to this community. Thank you very much.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum. So a lot of links has been shared. So please go through the recording. And if you want to explore more, you have public links as well, and some IBM links as well were given. So please start looking into it and exploring it and share with others as well. Jazakallahu khairan kaseera wa ahsanul jaza. With this, I'll end. Subhanallah.
The link to the presentation will be shared as well, right?
Presentation. So how to download that? So video will be anyway. This will be available.
Okay.
So hope this will be fine. tinyurl.com/mfid.
Yeah, that should be okay.
Okay. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. Jazakallah.
Wa alaikum salam.
Assalamu alaikum.